And Jody's going to start us off.
So welcome everyone. This is our first session on summative assessment. Our second session will be next Tuesday, so a week from now. And it's the same link that you used today. So you'll be able to get in with that same link. But I will send out a reminder email on Tuesday morning with all the information in it again, in case that email gets lost. So if you want to join me in prayer, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, thank you for giving me hope, because without hope, I would just be negative about everything. Hope helps me do lots of new things and makes me dream of things I can't do and one day doing them. Hope means trying new things and not giving up. Amen. Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And that is from Marty in grade 3 at St. Philip's School. For land acknowledgement, the Creator gifted us with this land that we are blessed to share and care for together. The Calgary Catholic School District acknowledges the land we gather on Mohkinstsis is the ancestral territory of the Siksikapi, the Siksika, Diani, Piikani, and Amsaki Piikani. We acknowledge all the Treaty 7 signatories, including the Tsuut'ina people, as well as the Eyarhe Nakota Nations, Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley. This land is also home of Métis Region 3 and all others who call this place home. So, like I said, this is session number 1, where we're going to get into summative assessment. So we're going to talk about assessment design, reliability and validity, planning with the end in mind, and blueprinting. So all of those things we're going to discuss. We have activities all around that before leading to our second session next Tuesday, which will talk about triangulating, balancing assessment, zeros, homework, and group work, as well as communicating and reporting. Now, we know these sessions are jam-packed, so they are recorded and we will send out the recording, or if for some reason you can't make a session and you want to watch that recording, that is available as well. Otherwise, I will be in the chat. Please put any questions in the chat as we're moving through this.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Brandy Langler, and I'm one of the ed tech consultants with our district. And I know Jody, I don't know if she introduced herself, but that who was just talking is Jody, and she's also an ed tech consultant. And with us also is Cheryl Fernando, and she's one of our secondary consultants. And so we're your presenters today, and we're going to kind of go through the different stuff that we've put together in terms of summative assessment and the resources and activities that go along with that. So to begin, if you've not done a pear deck, it's an interactive slideshow. So we're going to ask you actually right now to do a little activity. So on this slide is what we're calling an assessment survey. And what we want you to do is read the statements. There's 5 bullets. And what the first one, for example, says accurately reflect the learner outcomes within the program of studies. So this is actually coming from our TQS and what we are supposed to be adhering to as teachers in terms of assessment. And so read through each of these. And what I want you guys to do is to draw a check mark beside the assessment practices that you do best and an X beside the ones you are hoping to improve upon. And so it's just a little survey so that we can kind of gauge where everyone is at and where we're going to go with the rest of the session and session 2. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that.
This would also be a good time to have music. I want to note that.
Yes. Yes. Paula, are you there?
I might start singing Bon Jovi, so be careful.
Okay, it looks like we have almost everybody answering. Um, so here are some of our responses. I believe this is all anonymous. I'm hoping that it is because it should be. Is it true, Jody and Cheryl? Okay, so as we're looking at this is really for us to kind of see where people are at, and you can kind of see this one in the middle is a lot of people have that as an X or wanting to have some improvement on. Let me just go back here. So generating evidence of student learning to inform teaching practice through a balance of formative and summative assessment experiences. So if you were in our formative session, we did talk a lot about the different strategies that you can use. And we also are building out our assessment guideline site to have some of those strategies in there too. So that should be helpful as well. Today, we're actually going to look at some of the ways to align our outcomes to our assessment as well. And so that will really help with that support and balance of our assessment. And Cheryl's going to get right into that in a little bit here. So that was a really great activity. I hope I had it up a little long enough for at least you guys to see. We can definitely chat about it after the session as well, but it gives us some feedback as to where everybody's at and helps us plan sort of next session as well.
Sorry to interrupt, Randy.
Yeah.
There are people who still need the link who missed it.
Okay.
I can't paste it. So if you would be able to do that, that would be great. Just one more time, maybe just to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just try to find where I can have that because it disappears as soon as I start the session. So it might just mean that people need to go to joinpd.com.
Okay.
And then they just need to put in the code in the top right there. Oh, here we go. There we go. The link is in the chat now. And I love how the chat is getting musical requests. So that's always great. Thanks for that, Kevin. Okay, so as I said, our assessment guideline site has a ton of resources in it. So I'm just going to take you there now. And this is actually going to be shared through the web or the slideshow as well. We're going to have you get into a Google Classroom. If you were in our formative assessment sessions, you were also in a Google Classroom there where we shared all of our resources. So we'll do the same here. And so this link will be there as well. But essentially, you can get to it from the EPD homepage, and then you're going to click on Assessment Guidelines. And from there, we're looking at a summative assessment. And today we're talking about this big square one here, assessment design. Within the assessment design area, we have different design elements that you can go through to learn about. And these will all be really helpful in improving your summative assessments and just giving more balance to your assessment. So not necessarily always relying on that multiple choice test at the end of a unit. And so we're going to talk about some of these things today. And then a few, I think that we end off with our second session with the triangulating and balancing assessment. So the first three we'll go through today. We're not going to have a time to get into all the details of it, but there's definitely a lot of resources within these topics that you can kind of go through in your own time. And so we just wanted to point out that this site has a lot of great resources for you to check out and use even after our session is done. So let's just review quickly before we get too far into it, the difference between formative and summative. I think for most people, we typically do understand that formative is non-graded work. And so it really helps students to learn and practice. So we do this throughout our course. And it helps us to identify where students' gaps are and help to give them some specific help and support to move their learning forward. Whereas our summative is assessing student performance. And that's where our grade is coming in and our reporting. And our summative is really for that reporting. It's reporting to our parents, it's reporting to students, and it's reporting to other teachers. And so it happens usually at the end of an instructional period, and we collect evidence of student knowledge, skill, or proficiency. And then the how is usually exit learning products or a cumulative summative assessments. So the biggest difference between the two is one is graded and one is ungraded. And so today we're talking about the graded portion. So as I said in our summative assessment website, I'm just going to flip back over there. We have different elements of assessment design, and the first one is validity and reliability. So we're just going to quickly talk about those two things. Let me just jump back. The first one is reliability. So reliability is one of the main aspects of it is replication. Okay, and this can be achieved in a lot of different ways, but it's often done over time. So you're usually going to be able to replicate a student's work in one instance. So when we're talking about reliability and replication, we're talking about, so if you have a multiple choice test, and you want to know if a student understands a topic, you're testing that topic, 2 or 3 times in that test to make certain that you know they understand that topic. So that's where the replication comes in. The even better than that is to have varied ways of looking at if a student knows something. So using multiple choice, short answer, multiple ways of figuring out if they know that topic. The other example that we have here is if we use a thermometer to measure the temperature of a liquid and we get a consistent reading after measuring several times, then we know our thermometer is reliable. Versus if it's jumping all over the place, then we're kind of looking at our thermometer going, time to get a new one. In the context of classroom assessment, we've got a quote here: unless a student responds to more than one prompt or question, or more than one rater or judge scores the performance, or the student performs a task on at least 2 different occasions, there's no replication and thus no way to estimate the consistency of her performance. So again, this goes back to that multiple choice that we were talking about. If a student answers something correct on a multiple choice exam, if we only have the multiple choice asking the topic in one way, then we don't really know if they've guessed or if they actually know the content. So that's where your reliability is coming into play with your summative assessments. The next one is validity. And so to understand validity, we need to ask the question, does our assessment, so our test, our quiz, or assignment, measure what we intend to measure? So for example, if our thermometer is off by 3 degrees, then the temperature will read every time with an excess of 3 degrees. It is reliable because it's consistent, but it's not valid because it is not the true temperature. It adds the 3 degrees every time. So when we're looking at reliability in the context of classroom assessment, again, we're intending to measure mathematical thinking, for example, but if our assessment method is predominantly multiple choice, then our inferences about that assessment will not yield those valid results, right? Because we're looking at something more creative and trying to use something that measures more knowledge-based type questions. So these two things, validity and reliability, we need to keep in mind that no method or instrument of measurement is perfect. So even within our thermometer example, there will be slight variations or random fluctuations around the true temperature of a liquid. And so we need to look at reliability more on a continuum and not something you have on your test or don't have. It's more of how can we create more reliable and more valid assessment methods. And again, one of the important things is to remember that our assessment method is, no assessment method is without a measure of error. So we need to be humble about our classroom assessment. And I realized I did not finish my sentence on this slide, so I apologize there. So when you're doing your assessments, just try to keep in mind that there are errors on our assessments. Students sometimes might have an off day and not perform as well as we actually think that they probably should have. That happens often. And so that's where we just need to look at potentially reassessment. And then Cheryl's going to talk about, outcomes aligned assessment and how we can improve our reliability and validity as well. So those are two big concepts that I kind of quickly went over. So again, you could look at our EPD and go back there for some resources on that. There's videos that Dylan William has about reliability and validity that you can watch to further get an understanding of that. But just in the interest of time for our session, we couldn't go through it in too much detail. But we do want to ask you guys a question. And so it asks, which element of assessment design do you think you could benefit from learning more about? And so you should see a little green answer question in the bottom right corner where you can look at a multiple choice. It gives you a multiple choice questions and you can answer from there. One more minute and then we'll move on. So here's our responses, just so the other presenters can kind of gauge that as well. And so you can see lots of people are saying both, or validity is pretty high up there. And we're not surprised by this because these are, I think, relatively new terms in assessment that we haven't really spoken too much about before. And they're not the easiest things to understand. They actually are more nuanced than even I kind of introduced them as. And so there's more aspects to both of them, but I tried to simplify it as best we could for this session. But there are ways, just so you guys know, as we're going along, to increase our reliability and validity. And Cheryl will talk about that with our outcomes aligned assessments as well. So the next thing that we have in our assessment design section is planning with the end in mind. So flipping back over to that site, we have validity and reliability. And the next one is planning with the end in mind. And that really is identifying the assessment focus and then finding an effective teaching and learning plan that can be developed. So figuring out your assessment first and then doing your planning so that everything aligns. And so just go back here. We have three questions that we ask. One is, or three, sorry, processes that we're kind of focusing on here. So one is determine desired results, targets, and they're informed by our outcomes. Number two is then choose our methods of assessment that align appropriately with those outcomes. And number three is plan activities and formative assessment tasks to support. So when we go through these, and I'm going to jump back over to the site here, when we go through these, there's a few things within each of those that you can learn about. And so again, what is our assessment focus? So we want to start with that and really determine by looking at our outcome, what is the focus for our assessment, and figure out how to what's going to be the best way to assess our students. Because once we figure that target out, then we can do our planning and our supports to meet that outcome. And then next, what assessment methods are best suited to assess the outcomes? And so there's a lot of different types of assessments that we can use. They usually fall within these four categories. So selected response, written response, a performance assessment, or some personal communication. And then we look at what method is going to match with that outcome the best. This chart is really awesome. It kind of goes through strong, good, okay, and poor. So if we're doing something that's in that type of thinking where we're asking students to create, and then you can see a whole bunch of verbs that go along with that, and we're using, for example, multiple choice, this maybe isn't the best method to go with that type of an outcome. And that when we're trying to look at that type of thinking. And so again, this is where that validity and reliability come in. And if we're measuring what we intend to measure, if this is really truly the best method to use. And so this chart is, I really encourage you guys to have a look at that as a resource for after this session. Then we also have some other resources to check out right under that. So you can have a look and peruse through those as well. And then the last thing that we should be doing is looking at what activities and formative assessment tasks we can use to support the learning. So once we have a clear understanding of our assessment focus and learning targets from our outcome, then we can begin to plan the activities and tasks that will support that end goal. And so that's the whole focus of this planning with the end in mind. So again, it's kind of shifting our focus in a way to the assessment first and then our planning. Below that, we've got a whole bunch of design templates. So backward design template that you can use to do this. So shifting again to that assessment focus and then planning from there. So you can go and check out some of those as well. We also have a link to EPD and the different areas. So I know some of our elementaries actually have a whole page on planning and a whole page on assessment. So we've linked to those pages specifically. In our secondary areas, we've just linked to the EPD homepage only because they split from junior high and high school. So we just wanted to make sure you could go to either one depending on where you're teaching. And I'm going to shift it over to Cheryl to begin talking about outcomes aligned assessment. And I know our high schools mostly refer to that as blueprinting.
Thank you, Brandy. Hi, everybody. As Brandy mentioned, I'm a secondary social studies consultant. So when we were working together on this session, we really talked a lot about some of the things that we found when we're supporting teachers. So myself and my other colleagues who are secondary consultants and elementary colleagues as well, consultants, found that when we're supporting teachers, one of the biggest things that we're trying to do to help improve assessment is go back to the notion of really aligning your assessment to outcomes, also known as blueprinting. So this is really important because if you're teaching through your textbook and really just going chapter by chapter, you're not really focusing on what you are kind of being mandated to teach through the program of studies. So outcomes aligned assessment is the key to planning with the end in mind and to that validity that Brandy was talking about earlier. So outcomes aligned assessment, also known as blueprinting, the term blueprinting comes from architecture, as we all know, meaning a detailed plan of action. So when you're applying this to your assessment, you want to start with that main focus and then work from there. So you're directly linking all the time to your outcomes in the program of studies. So on your assessments, each question or every assignment should be directly linked. And that really helps with a lot of things, which I'll go over in the next slide here. But generally speaking, this idea should be applied at the beginning of your course when you're first starting to teach something to your long range plans. It's also evident within the unit plans, your daily lesson plans, your formative assessment, and the grade book. So everything is really valid this way because you are teaching what you're supposed to be teaching. You are then assessing what you're supposed to be assessing. And then your grade book also does reflect outcomes. It's not going to be a mystery to teachers or parents what has been assessed because outcomes are at the forefront of this whole process. So the benefits then is once you start, right, planning with the end in mind, you have your summative plan together, then you're going to plan your formative assessment. And what you'll be doing with checking for understanding and looking to move learners forward is going to move towards that end goal. If you do it the opposite way and you sort of just start teaching, you're doing your lessons and your assessments are sort of the afterthought, you aren't really working towards that specific goal necessarily. So even though it is definitely more time consuming in some ways, it is way more effective to make sure you really planned out those assessments from start to finish in those units. So we really recommend using that approach. Secondly, your instructional activities, again, because you know what your end goal is going to be, are going to be much more effective, targeted, and intentional. On the other side of things as well, differentiating, which we know is a big part of our role as teachers. We have kiddos from all different levels, experiences, learning at different rates. And if you've blueprinted your assessments well, you can easily see the ways in which you're assessing and how you can change that for students in certain ways to make it accessible for them. So all students can be successful because you, know that you're actually assessing the outcomes for everyone, and using different methods that are going to help students access the assessment. Lastly, this process also makes reassessment easier. And this is something we've talked a lot more about in the district in the last couple of years. And when you are organizing your assessments and you've got, for example, your exam is structured by topic and outcome instead of by type of assessment, such as a true-false section or a multiple choice section, when you go to review that assessment with a student, you can see which outcomes that they really need some help with to review. And also you as an instructor can look at what you need to maybe do a little bit reteaching on or a little bit of review on. If you can see that in certain sections of the test that are organized by outcome, students haven't done particularly well. So it's a process that really helps you focus and drives everything else. So starting with the summative assessment, blueprinted well, is going to make everything else flow better and really work effectively for your students to learn, for you to check on their learning as well. And again, keep the learning moving forward. Okay, so the next thing we have for you is a chance to hear from teachers, because I think for me, in my experience, always kind of hearing about somebody else's experience helps, right? To really see how you would apply some of the things we've talked about in today's session to your own practice. So we have some excerpts from a book on summative assessment that we've referenced quite a bit here in this presentation and on the site. So each of the readings that you're going to be able to access are titled My Classroom Then and Now. And what you will see in one of these readings, I don't know, Brandy, if you can bring one of them up, if that's possible, just to open. You have a reflection from the teacher on what they used to do in their practice and what they now do, why they changed, and what they notice as a result. So they're really quick readings, about a page, maybe a page and a half, for you to sort of read about how the teachers have put some of these ideas into practice. If you can go back to the screen then, Brandy. Thank you. And as you can see from what we have for you here, we have 5 different options of articles for you to choose from to read. So we have organized them in a couple of different ways. So they're organized by grade. Depending on what you teach, you might want to go to one of these areas or another. But we've also given you some ideas about what they're talking about. So for example, the grade 2 is talking about clear targets. Grade 4 is talking about grouping targets together, assessment blueprinting, determining purpose, and blueprint format. So we're going to give you the option of which of these readings you would like to kind of go through. And as you read them, we would like you to think about the questions here on the screen. So what part of the excerpt do you most relate to? What strategy could you adopt to improve your assessment practice? So if you can't resonate with both of those questions, hopefully at least one of them, you have something that you can think about. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give you 5 minutes to choose the article. Brandy's going to show you how to do that. And then after a little bit of time has passed, we're going to open some breakout rooms for you guys to talk. And we know that some of you maybe not be the biggest fan of breakout rooms. We've been there ourselves, but we really think this is a great experience for you to talk to teachers who chose the same article, to maybe just have a bit of a discussion about what about that you can learn from, and even if you have some questions about what you read. So Brandy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll walk everybody through that process of how to get to these articles. And what Cheryl's actually saying is don't leave because we're doing a breakout room. So what you want to do, I'm going to get you guys into that Google Classroom right now, so that you have the links to both this presentation, our EPDs links are in there, and these articles are in there. And so I'm just going to share I'll put the link in the chat for our Google Classroom. So just give me 1 second here. There you go. So everybody should be able to click on that link in the chat and join the Google Classroom. And then once you're in the Google Classroom, you're going to go to the topics on the left and choose session 1. And in session 1, under breakout room readings, that's where the different articles are found. And so if you mouse over them, you'll be able to see what grade level they are. And then you can choose the article that pertains mostly to you. And also while you're doing that, I'm just going to show you, we went through the planning with the end in mind section. The next section of the website is the outcomes aligned assessment, which is what Cheryl was just speaking about. So again, resources are there as well.
Sorry, could you please tell me what the class code is for the Google Classroom?
Yep.
Oh, there it is. Thank you.
Yep. I'm surprised if you click on the link, it should just take you right in.
I'm on 2 different devices and I can't access Google Classroom from the one. So
that makes sense. Thank you. I was like, I hope it's working. Okay, I'm gonna put the code in the chat too then. Yes, I can repost the code for PERDAC. 1 second.
I got it.
Oh, you did?
Brandy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think she wants the code too, Jody, just because she said she's on 2 devices. The link she can't click on.
I'm in.
Oh, okay, perfect. Never mind.
If anyone's having any other issues, just let us know. But otherwise, in about 5 minutes, we'll kind of regroup. That should be enough time to read the articles. You only have to choose 1 to read, by the way. But if you have more time, feel free to choose more than 1. Thanks, everybody, for participating with those. I was in the high school social group and we were having a good discussion in there. I hope you all did as well. And feel free, as we said before, to work on or look at the other articles as well, because I think they all have different pieces of what we've talked about in our session today. One thing that came out in the quick few minutes that I was listening in with Anna and Sydney and Dan was also making exams, like where to start and how to make a good valid assessment. And again, it comes back to that blueprinting idea, is really knowing what you want to assess, thinking about the different categories, like how you would group the targets as well, and constructing it from there. So whether you are taking questions from a few different exams, if you know what your focus is going to be, that will help you select the questions instead of sort of kind of doing it more randomly, potentially. So maybe those are some things, Brandy and Jody, we can talk about in terms of the next steps when you're kind of trying to design an assessment. But we do have a couple of tools that are kind of part of our potential activities that will help with evaluating and designing assessments. So we can talk about that next, perhaps. Okay, so this is part of sort of, being part of this series and, getting your badge for participating in all of them. We've got, and also for your own growth and practice, is to try some of the tools and put into practice some of the things that we've talked about today. So I know, Brandy, you probably have 18 copies of these checklists on your computer, but if you wouldn't mind making one more and making this a little bit bigger so I could share with everyone what we've got here. So everyone, these checklists, again, when you click, they are available to you on the site. So maybe, Brandy, we can show them where they are first, just as a reference. Yeah, so on the blueprinting part of the assessment design site, on the right-hand side, this is where you could, again, make these copies, but they are in the Google Classroom as well. So the checklist that we've got for you here, the first one, we can go back to that. Thanks, Randy. The first one is, I have to change my screen here. there we are, is a checklist for designing your own assessments using blueprinting. So what we've done here, and had some input from all the other secondary consultants and the elementary consultants as well, on looking at this. So we have divided it by sort of the three, I guess, types of most common assessments that we've got. So an assignment or project, written response, an exam or quiz. So when you are looking at designing your own, creating it from scratch, figure out which method of assessment you're going to use, and then you could use some of these things to guide your work. The second assessment checklist that we have that could be helpful in your practice is for evaluating an assessment for use. And this is probably one of the more common things, right? You might have a colleague who shared an assessment with you. You might be finding one of that, whether it's on EPD or you found it somewhere else. But there's a few things that we really should be thinking about before just using it, even though it might be titled the same as what we think we're teaching. So before evaluating any method of assessment for use, identify the key outcomes or skills that you need to assess and have taught. And secondly, what's the timeline for students to complete the assessment, right? So if you only have a 45-minute period in junior high, what's a fair amount of time for students to complete the assessment? And taking into account that beginning of the class time, the end of the class time, what time really do the students have to work with? And then how do you create the best, most valid and reliable assessment to assess what you are teaching? So hopefully either one of these tools could come in handy for you. And of course, these are all supported by the other planning and assessment tools you will find on the EPD sites for your subject areas. So Brandy, I don't know if you want to go back to explaining the Google Classroom part of where to find that too.
Yeah, so I will show that. I'm just going to give you guys your set. So that's option one, is to design or evaluate an assessment. So to design one and kind of go through the checklist for designing, or take one that you already have and evaluate that using the evaluation checklist. The other option is to look at what's wrong with this picture assignment. And so basically what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Google Classroom and click under the activity topic option 2, you're going to click on the PDF that aligns most closely to your teaching position, and then answer the following. So you're actually looking at a learner outcome, and then the corresponding assessment method that they used or item, and looking at how well it aligns with the level of cognition within that outcome. So, and then kind of reflecting on that and saying what improvements or modifications you would suggest. So an example of that is here. We've got a grade 6 English language arts outcome where they ask for and evaluate the usefulness of feedback and assistance from peers. And the assessment item is students will participate in peer review of their current writing assignment. And so it says here that peer review can be an effective step in the writing process. However, this outcome requires students to take a large degree of responsibility. And it kind of goes through the modifications that this assessment item would need in order to better meet this outcome. And so your job in this option would be to do what's under the modification, like the example shows here. So looking at the assessment item and deciding on whether it actually meets that outcome. And if it doesn't, which most FYI don't, because there is some modifications that you could add to that in reflections. So your job will be to try to figure out what could make it better. What could you add? And in here you can see that they've added like another little evaluation so that peers are working together to give feedback to one another. And so in our Google Classroom, that is under the topic activity. And so again, you have option 1, evaluate or design an assessment. And option 2 is the looking at what is wrong with this picture. So matching the method with the outcome and reflecting on whether or not that's actually done a good job to meet that outcome. So the hope is that by our next session in a week that you might be able to get one of these done. I mean, if we can't, that's okay. But to get your badge, that's what you would not for the next session, but definitely turn it into the Google Classroom. And once we see that you've turned it in and done that part of it, then we can give you feedback or send you the badge. If you can get it done for next session, great. If you can't, we all will understand. And let me just go back here. So if you have questions or you're not sure of something, please feel free to reach out, and as well reach out to any of our consultants. If you're wondering about specific subject area, it's best to reach out to those subject area consultants and ask for their input and help to guide you in that process. This is a general kind of look at assessment, and our assessment guidelines site will help you through that process as well. And there's tons of resources on there as well to help you. Next session, we are going to look at, and I know people put this in the feedback form that we sent out, or the pre-session form that we sent out, that they were looking at wanting to have strategies and things like that. And so we will build that into the next session, and triangulating and balancing our assessments will really look at some of those strategies and how we can do different methods, not just that multiple choice that I think we rely a lot on to assess our students. I think that's it. We want to thank you guys for coming out. I'm not sure, Cheryl or Jody, if you have anything to add to that.
No, nothing from my end. Thank you, everyone. It was great to chat with a few of you in the chat room there. And yeah, like Brandy said, any questions, feel free to email us.
And we'll leave this open now if anybody has a burning question that they want to ask before we all leave. But the session is over and you are free to go.
Randy, there's just a question from Anna. I don't know if you want to answer that one just directly to her.
Yeah, Anna, you don't need to be registered in the previous one to get the badge. They're standalone. If you're interested in the previous one though, we can share a Google Classroom with you and you can kind of watch the videos and go through that as well. It's more self-guided.
Yes, great question. We did do it so this could be self-guided.
Thank you.